He is the most brilliant fictional character, but his mind tricks are finally confirmed by science. And those mental gymnastics are applicable in everyday life, and you don't need to be a world-famous brilliant detective to use them as well. In this episode we will see how famous mind palace of one and only Sherlock Holmes works in real life, what science says about this groundbreaking technique, how classical musicians and memory champions use it, but most importantly, I will teach you how to use this mental technique in everyday life to create powerful, long-lasting memories. Hi there, my name is Vladislav Radak. I'm a writer and a mathematician, and this is Fabric of Life, a show where we try to fuse cutting-edge science with classical art to answer the most difficult questions humanity ever faced. Sometimes people are curious, and sometimes, to be honest, they are a little bit disappointed. They write me in the comments that I didn't use a lot of mathematics to explain this classical art, or that I didn't use classical books to explain some scientific phenomena. But today I have something really spectacular for you, because there is nothing more interesting than a great fictional detective character jumping out of the page of the book to take us on one amazing scientific journey. Are you ready? Let me take you inside of the Mind Palace for an adventure.
Hello, Instagram.
Bad boy. Run wild. I'm on a mission and I won't stop. No destination, but it's rough and shot.
In 1887, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle crossed out the words on the cover of his then unpublished manuscript, and instead of tangled skin he wrote A Study in Scarlet. And the consulting detective of Baker Street was born, and after 56 books and short stories it became a worldwide phenomenon. By the 1990s, there were already 25,000 stage adaptations, films, television productions and publications featuring the detective, and according to my knowledge, only the BBC version of talented Moffat and Gatiss mentions Mind Palace. But Mind Palace is prehistoric memory technique firstly mentioned by ancient Greeks. The Greek poet Simonides is supposed to have come up on this technique around 400 years before Christ and used it to memorize poems. It became popular with Greek and Roman orators, including Cicero, who used it to memorize speeches to remember evidence for cases. It flourished in Renaissance when magi like Giordano Bruno and Ramon Lull memorized incredibly complex systems of words, symbols and hieroglyphs in an attempt to become a sort of worldwide web of occult knowledge. Users of this mnemonic technique, called the method of loci, actually imagine some familiar place or some familiar path, or in the case of Sherlock Holmes, his mind palace, and they actually go around this familiar path and they drop certain objects they try to remember or certain words, and when they want to dig out that memory again, they need to revisit this path and pick up those things. I want to explain you an example better, so let me take you to my favorite park to explain you the situation that happened to me a couple days ago where I actually used this method of loci. The other day I had an idea for a new episode of this show. It was supposed to be called Inside Tesla's Head. I wanted to do an episode about Nikola Tesla, and I had an epiphany while I was jogging and I didn't have my trusty notebook on me to immediately write it down. I was worried that I would already forget it by kilometer 5, so I used method of loci, or my mind palace. I broke the title of my next episode into single words and hid them along my favorite jogging path. I imagined leaving a book bag with the world inside the bag, and I will pick it up later when I need this memory. Following after the bridge, I came to a street lamp where I seated the name of the scientist that invented alternating current that made all the lights in the world possible. And then, next to my favorite resting place, I dropped the word head because of three heads touching each other. And now, a couple of days later, I can retrace my steps along my favorite jogging path and pick up missing objects and construct them into sentence, or in this case, title of my next project, Inside Tesla's Head, is finally carved inside my brain. It's really hard for me to forget about it. Maybe this ancient technique can look really simple. Scientists are showing that actually gives some really impressive results. By training with this method, the world's best memory champions can remember crazy amounts of information like word lists, digit series, and deck of cards, according to new cognitive neuroscience study. One of the lead researchers in this field, neuroscientist Isidora Wegner of University of Vienna, and her colleagues were fascinated by this memory world championship and performance of the contestants there. So they wanted to investigate more, and they found some stunning results. To evaluate the method of loci, Wagner and her team enrolled 17 memory athletes, or champions who were ranked among the world's top 50 in memory competition, and 16 others that matched the athletes in characteristics such as age and intelligence. The researchers took functioning magnetic resonance scans of the participants' brains while asking them to study random words on a list. Then, the researchers presented the participants with 3 words at a time from the list and asked them to recall if the words were at the same order as previously studied. In the second part of the study, they enrolled 50 participants who previously had no experience in memorizing and trained 17 of them for 6 weeks to recall memories using the method of loci. The rest of the participants were in the control group, that means that they used some other technique. They again scanned the participants' brains with fMRI as they performed the same tasks both before and after training. The researchers also asked the participants to recall which words were on the list 20 minutes and 24 hours after their first fMRI scans. And not surprising at all, the participants who trained with this method of loci had much improved memory compared to those groups that used some other memory techniques or no technique at all. What was also improving was that the durability of their memory was much longer, and they didn't have any significant change in a short-term memory. 4 months later, people who trained with this method of loci could remember about 50 words versus 30 and 27 in control groups, respectively. What was more surprising, world memory champions and the participants who trained with the method of loci showed similar brain activity as they memorized word lists and ordering. But what came as the biggest surprise of this study is that brain scans of participants who used this ancient memory technique usually had much less flaring or much less activation in the parts usually responsible for long-term memory, proving that this ancient technique, both for amateurs and pros, requires much less effort for storing long-lasting memories. So memory pros are not the only ones who can benefit from mind palace. Classical musicians use this technique to memorize every single note of complex pieces, and concerts breaking down passages and spilling notes along the familiar walking routes, or associating passages with familiar emotions or life stories. So, I'm not a pro, which is completely okay because this is also not a real piano, but I spoke with a couple of people who are professional classical musicians, and they explained to me how their mind palace works. And now I will try to recreate something, just improvising here at this piano. Let's start with some simple Philip Glass interpretations, and they imagine the first passage or the very beginning of the composition as something from their childhood. It goes like this. And then something strange happens. So that's their childhood memory, which kind of repeats when they go through their life. This is the sort of repetition with 1 octave higher, which some musicians may associate with more intensive memory or similar story happening later in life. So maybe they associated with some summer rain they had, but then the thunder of real life comes in. This way, musicians, rather than memorizing note by note, they transform passages into sentences and stories. And similar the way we write and speak, everything needs to make sense at the end. And then they experience this strange feeling again. So they are immediately transferred to their childhood. Always remembering this strange thing that happened to them. From fictional character that entertain generations to record-breaking memory world champions, from neuroscience labs to concert halls, Memory Palace is one of those great phenomena that always makes us excited to be human. In one of the future episodes, if we have time, I will maybe explain you how I write my whole novel inside my memory palace before actually sitting in front of the computer to spill all the words on the page. Until then, stay tuned and curious, and don't forget, libraries still